Back in 2021, we started this little ride called Toasting the Classics with an epic 1,800-page read, the Gulag Archipelago. But we were sweet summer children in those days, without a clue that Russia would be in the news again, or more importantly, how to record, edit, or post a podcast. That first episode we released was full of rookie errors, putting a unidirectional mic on a table with our drinks being first among them, not understanding how to make the overall volume audible being a close second. So, 4 years later, I decided to do a special edition of our first episode. Clint will be shooting first, and if you listen well, you'll hear the sound of dewbacks walking by in the background. Just in time for the long, dark winter, go back and listen to where it all began, a Toasting the Classics classic, Episode 1 Redux, the Gulag Archipelago. What are we drinking tonight? What do we read?
Well, let's start with what we read.
We read The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
Your Gulag Archipelago is much bigger than mine.
Yeah, well, that's just how some people are born. No, I read the unabridged version, the first two volumes.
Oh, you didn't read the third?
It's 1,100 pages between the first two volumes.
So no third. So you didn't finish it?
I own it. I looked at it. I flipped through it. But by the time 3 weeks had gone by...
So volume 3, you don't know how it ended?
It comes to an end here. He says he's ending it. He says, I'm never going to get back to this project again. And I was looking at the shelf and thinking, yeah, you did. There's a whole other book. There's another 600 pages here. The first volume is 500 and change. No, I'm sorry, 600 and change. The second one is 680. So what's that? I'm well over 1,300
Did you read it all?
I read every single page of these two volumes.
I read every single page, and I finished it.
Of the abridged volume.
The abridged volume.
Which is how many pages in total? Once abridged.
468.
Not even as long as one of the three volumes.
It is 468.
Okay.
Not including the afterword, which is 2 pages.
So much smarter. I don't know why I didn't do that. I don't know why I didn't do that. Well, I found crummy versions. See, I love these. These are nice, but you got the exact same one I did.
I know, right?
Whatever this is, Harper Perennial Modern Classics. And I probably will buy more things in that series. It's a good looking quality paperback,
So what can you say about the book? Just generally context-wise?
Well, I thought I might spend like an hour talking about what I can say about the book.
Other than that. But I mean, just to set it up for people.
Just set it up. I mean, this is a book that came out at a time when there was a big thaw in what the Soviet Union was like. After Stalin died, there was a transition to Khrushchev, who has kind of a bad rep in the United States, and history was not favorable towards Khrushchev, I think, in terms of him being a dictator just as much.
Right.
But for a time... I believe several years there was a thawing. And people were allowed to speak more freely. Everybody thought that, Stalin's dead, everything's going to be great now.
Yeah, it was kind of a reaction to Stalin from Khrushchev.
Right.
Who some say either killed Stalin or
Did you see the movie Death of Stalin?
Allowed to die. No, I never saw it.
It's terrific. You got to watch that movie. Yeah. That's great. I can't remember the actor that plays Lucius Malfoy in Harry Potter, but he plays Marshal Zhukov and just like steals the
Really?
show. It's a terrific movie. It's hilarious. Like very good movie.
He was also in The Patriot.
He was in The Patriot.
That's a terrible movie.
He played the cavalry guy, Bannister Tarleton.
The bad guy. Yeah. So this is written by a guy named Alexander, I can pronounce that. Solzhenitsyn. Okay, when it comes to Russian pronunciations, you have a leg up on me.
I do. I kind of speak Russian to some extent.
You're
kitchen Russian. My wife is Russian.
Your wife is Russian. Mine is Hispanic, so help at all.
Well, we'll read something else where you get a leg up next time.
Absolutely. So. Okay. So Alexander Solzhenitsyn.
There you go.
All right. So he was a educated guy.
Definitely. And
he was educated in literature. I mean, he was a literature philosopher, writer, English. He has a pretty good life. He's well educated. He gets sent to the front lines when Germany invades Russia in World War II.
And not to forget, he's a true believer as a kid. He's like a young pioneer.
Yeah, they all are.
With part of the revolution. I think he's the first generation of people born at the time of the revolution. Right. Sort of like Midnight's Children with Salman Rushdie. He's one of the first people born in the Soviet Union and grows up believing it all until the war.
Believes in the Communist Party, member of the Communist Party, whole thing.
By the way, there are pictures of my wife as a little girl dressed as a young pioneer in her little baby communist outfit. It's adorable.
Oh, that's awesome. I know so many intellectuals who would really be into that. So many of my colleagues would welcome her into the fold.
Yeah.
We won't talk about that.
This will probably come up later. The fact that she actually has firsthand experience of socialism is the reason why she would never have anything to do with socialism.
Right.
So,
it's amazing how that works.
You find very few people from the former Soviet bloc that have much tolerance for socialism.
So he goes to fight. He's a captain, I believe. Golden epaulets. It's a big thing. Is they've got golden epaulets.
He mentions the bars on
the bars on his shoulders. Big thing in the Russian army. I think he was artillery or something like that. He's fighting valiantly and stuff. But he made the mistake of criticizing the war effort. It was very timid. It was, why isn't Stalin sending more troops to this area or something like that? And he sent a letter to a friend of his.
Sent a letter to a buddy
who was also on the front. Of course, as happens in tyrannies, letters get intercepted. He's hauled before the man and sent off to the Huskow.
Well, in all fairness, even in America,
we
censor people's letters when they're fighting on the front.
Yeah, but we don't lock them up for saying, you know what?
No, that's a big difference.
FDR is kind of an idiot.
I actually had a friend who had a job that was going over the emails of dead servicemen to make sure they hadn't said anything before they could release their emails to the family.
They release them. Oh, geez.
They would release them to the family, but he had to go through and make sure there wasn't any sensitive information. So he'd have the job of going through this guy who'd gotten killed his whole life.
That's terrible. All right, have you ever read Catch-22?
A long time ago.
Remember, it starts with him. The book starts with him.
That's a good one for this series.
Yeah, that actually is. The book starts with him censoring stuff.
Okay.
And he starts having fun censoring the letters.
Oh, yeah.
The boys back home.
I do remember that.
So he'll censor everything in a sentence except for the word the or monkey. And so the people they keeps them wondering what the hell is this guy writing about? Yeah. So he's hauled before the man. He said some stuff that I guess he shouldn't have about Stalin, but again, it wasn't really that bad. And he is found guilty of violating Section 58.
Section 58, right.
10 of the code, which is a political...
Which sounds like you're being super anal about talking about the code section, but this is something that gets hammered home and repeated throughout the book. The 58s. They call the people that go under this code the 58s.
The political prisoners.
Right. They talk about it over and over again.
But everybody's a 58. Children are 58s for making up a nursery rhyme about the party. Or about communism or something like that, about how they can never eat.
In the abridged version, did you get the story about the Chuvash kid, who Russian wasn't his first language, so he made an error in the Russian poem that he wrote about Stalin?
Yeah, I think so.
Ended up getting a 10-year sentence for making a mistake in his second language.
So that's kind of the setup of the book. The Gulag was a series of work concentration camps that the communist government had created. And they were all work camps. The entire government, the entire kind of ecosystem relied on free labor, on slave labor from these prison camps. And they would do everything from fell trees to mine coal to mine copper.
All these useless canal that goes
digging canals, building railroads across Siberia that never get hooked up. One of the famous stories was
something like 30 miles of track that just abandoned.
And it was in frozen tundra. Well, it was from each direction. So 30 miles coming from the east, 30 miles coming from the west, all laid by hand, taking months and months and months over frozen tundra. All these people died.
Thousands dead, probably. Yeah.
And then they abandoned it a mile away from connecting them. So that's what they survived on, was free labor. And you could get sent for anything. They had people literally that would clip some grain or steal a couple of vegetables from a communist farm. They'd be sent to prison for that, or to the Gulag for that.
Well, one of my favorite stories like that was a guy goes down to the store to buy a bust of Stalin to take back to his office so he can have a bust of Stalin in his office. And he gets out the door and realizes he can't carry it. So he's trying to get down the street, and he figures out the only way to carry it is to tie a rope around its neck, and people see him going down the road with a noose around Stalin's neck.
So it looks like he's hanging.
It looks like he's hanging Stalin. This guy goes to prison for 10 years. For that,
know? The very first few chapters were all about everything you could do wrong, and you didn't know what you could do wrong until they arrested you. They just show up and said, hey, you're under arrest.
Which I think is one of the big points of the book. I don't even know if Solzhenitsyn's trying to make this point, but one of the big things is I don't think it's so much about socialism or communism. It's the lack of rule of law. It's the fact that you can be arrested for anything at any time. There's no recourse. There's nothing you can say to anybody about I was arrested for a bad reason. In America, we take that for granted.
Mm-hmm.
In most countries, and it hasn't really changed. That's the thing. Even in Russia today, this guy, Alexei Navalny, I don't know if you followed the story.
Yeah, a little bit.
He was essentially had to go to, I think it was Germany, but they poisoned him, and he failed to appear for a court appearance in Russia because he was dying of the poisoning that Putin had done to him.
Right.
And then he gets back to Russia and he's arrested for the failure to appear.
Right.
There's really not a whole lot of difference between that and the way the Stalinist state functioned in a lot of ways. Now, people don't go to camps and die by the millions.
As far as we know.
As far as we know. Now, it's happening in China.
Yeah, it is happening in China. And that was, these are parallels that we can draw later. But, with that example that you gave, they sent assassins to other countries to kill these people.
Oh, yeah.
To their political
Did you hear the one about the umbrella with the polonium, maybe?
Yeah.
On the tip of the umbrella and killed the guy like weeks later.
That was in London.
Yeah, in London that happened.
But Stalin was just a madman, a psychopath. He sent millions to the Gulag, worked them to death. And here's the thing. People say, capital punishment was outlawed in Russia in like 1939 or whatever the hell it was. But you can work them to death. If they fall over dead, the state didn't kill him. He died.
Absolutely still shooting people during the Second
World War. They were shooting people after the Second World War too, and they just wouldn't report it.
I think Solzhenitsyn is admitting this through the book. I think things were better by the 1950s and going forward. They weren't good. They weren't like anything like what they are in other countries in the free world, but it wasn't the dark days of Stalinist Soviet Union. I think there was less of that kind of thing. There weren't millions of people going off to gulags. There weren't people getting shot and left in the forest, just for nothing. I think things did change to some extent as the regime liberalized, and the change of leadership, I think, was a big deal.
Well, the change of leadership did help. I don't think he really acknowledged a change in the Gulag until Stalin died.
Absolutely, it's well after it's after Stalin where things changed. Not to being perfect, but the book would have never happened. Under Stalin.
Oh, absolutely.
The book was written, I think, over the course of the 40s and 50s while he's in prison. He's collecting materials.
Yeah.
Even under the liberal days of Khrushchev or whatever this opening up, it still had to be passed around hand to hand for people to read. It wasn't just published.
This one was written in the 50s and 60s. This one was written after. So was that Ivan Denisovich or whatever it was called?
Oh, Denisovich. Ivan Denisovich, yeah.
So he wrote that one first.
We probably don't want to tell people about One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich because that book is like 100 pages long and people can read that and get the exact same message that we got in 1,800 pages.
Okay, well, the reason Gulag Archipelago, however you want to pronounce it.
I say archipelago.
Okay. It is a classic. This won the author the Nobel Prize. So this is the classic. The previous one, though, was published under Khrushchev with his blessing.
Yeah, I think so.
It became, he sort of makes it clear at the end, if you had read the end, slacker.
Yeah, I don't know what happens.
that
I think the Soviet Union wins and the workers' paradise.
Is that what happens?
Yeah, I think so.
But Khrushchev kind of used it as a political tool, as propaganda, to say this is how bad Stalin was.
Right.
Because he said, this is Stalin's Gulag.
It's part of de-Stalinization.
Right, and this is part of that thought you're talking about. So he allowed it to be printed, Solzhenitsyn, that's sort of it.
Let's just keep going.
All right. He got a lot of flack from people that said, it's still going on. You can't say that it's thawed. You can't say anything's changed. It's still happening.
And in some ways, more controversial that it didn't start with Stalin.
Right.
That it clearly started in the first days of the revolution and could be laid on the shoulders of Lenin.
Yes, that's right.
Who is thought of as like George Washington by people in the Soviet Union at this time. You can't say anything. You can say bad things about Robert E. Lee, but not about George Washington in America.
Sure.
It's the same thing. You could trash Stalin, but not Lenin. We talked about a lot of people in my family being Russian. A lot of these people grew up lionizing Stalin just because of the war. These are Jewish people who have the KGB following them because they're Jewish and stuff, and they still think of Stalin as a hero.
Really?
Because if it hadn't been for Stalin, I'm not sure that the Russians win the war.
Yeah.
You kind of need a guy like that. Although he also made it much worse for them by killing everybody in the army before the war. So hard to pass judgment, but you could see how he'd be seen as a hero. Kind of like Churchill. He's a bad guy after the war.
I don't know, man. Look, FDR. Well, I guess so. FDR is seen as a hero and stuff, and he interned Japanese Americans as well.
That's right. Or anyway, saw over it. He's responsible for it.
He's responsible
he certainly
for
it.
But he's still seen by many to be, the reason that we won World War II, the reason
Sure.
why we got out of the Great Depression, which was in fact World War II. But I can kind of see that you need somebody like that for those times.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, man. It's weird. Cancel culture is catching up to a lot of people now. I wonder when it'll catch up to Stalin.
I'm ready to cancel Stalin.
Oh,
I think he was a bad guy.
I canceled him a long time ago. But
I'm going to go out on a limb here. And
how many times do you see people wearing Che Guevara shirts?
honestly, I think that has to do with, and I'm not a huge
Ignorance?
expert. Yes, exactly.
Ignorance,
and I'm not an expert on Che Guevara either. I read the Motorcycle Diaries. He's a fascinating young man. That actually is really fun. You would like him if you read that. But if you know anything about his actions in the Cuban Revolution and stuff, no, you wouldn't. It's not somebody that you would make a hero out of. So again, and certainly not if you're Cuban.
Right.
I don't think you see a lot of Cubans walking around with Che Guevara shirts.
I don't know. I mean,
Cuban Americans, I think pretty much.
Cuban
hate
Americans.
those guys.
Yeah, you're probably right. Yeah. This is a good time to pour some stuff. So
Okay.
you have ice, right?
I do have ice.
All right. So in every episode, I am going to bring a bottle of something, and we'll be drinking from that bottle of something. And the bottle of something sort of works with what we're talking about. In this one, obviously we're drinking vodka because
Obviously.
now I'm gonna pour us a short.
It's a pretty short one, yeah.
Yeah, short straight one on ice. This is Stolichnaya vodka, which as a kid, meaning in my 20s when I could legally drink,
Right.
or 16 when I drank anyway.
Statute of limitations,
Right,
I'm sure.
Stoli was like the brand to get because Stoli was Russian vodka, right? It wasn't this other absolute.
Absolute
was.
is Swedish, right?
I think so. Yeah, I think it's Swedish.
But that's legit.
well, they are.
But vodka should be from
we're
Russia.
drinking. Yeah, we're drinking.
On the bottle, I see it was established in 1936.
1938.
So this is 1938. I'm sorry.
1938. So this was established during
During the height of the Gulag system.
during the
I
height of
would
the
say.
Gulag system. Yeah, I can't remember if it was Smirnoff or if it was Stoli. I think it was
Oh,
Stoli.
what does James Bond drink for a vodka? All right.
Yeah, it is Stoli. So
Okay. Well, that seems wrong. It seems like he was courting the enemy in a way, like drinking their...
I know, right? He was so cool that he could drink the enemy's
Drink the enemies.
Yeah.
There you go. Do we know what Stolichnaya means? I can tell you it's an adjective
Wait, how do you know that?
because of the ending. It's an adjective. Stolichnaya it means it's an adjective. It's a feminine ending to an adjective, but I don't know what it means. Do you want to give like your credentials for talking about alcohol? Because I feel like people will listen.
So,
Okay.
and this is why I know this. My favorite movie, my favorite James Bond movie is Dr. No. Very first James
Really?
Bond.
So you
movie.
just were done after the first film? You were,
No.
It was all downhill after the first.
Sort of.
Okay.
I like the Daniel Craig ones. But anyway, so this is the original James Bond one. This is Stoli. Have you tried it yet?
No, I didn't know whether we were going to just
So this
dive
is a
in.
little Stoli over ice. And this is a neutral grain spirit. All vodkas are typically what they call a neutral grain spirit. A vodka is just a high percentage alcohol with no taste. That's all vodka is, really. And
The name means water.
what's that?
Vada means water. Vodka is like little
That's right.
water.
Yeah,
so-
that's
Which
right.
I think is a lot of, isn't whiskey water of life?
Yeah,
Like,
water of life. That's in Gaelic. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It
So
is.
this is pretty common.
So vodka is just it's a neutral grain spirit. It's got no taste. It's not supposed to have a taste. If it has a taste, then it's usually
Just a little bit of a whiff of doctor's office whenever I
Right.
drink a
Yeah,
little bit of vodka.
sterilization.
Although I have to say, I haven't had vodka straight in years, and this is better. Maybe I've just matured, but I don't mind sipping on
It's
this
watered
now.
down a little bit. It's not bad.
It
at
is
all.
water. We're letting the ice melt
Yeah.
into it a little bit. So. I've had my manhood tested by Russians several times and
Oh, have
been
you?
forced to drink lots of
From your
vodka.
from
and
wife's family.
my manhood was found badly, yes.
It was found wanting.
Yes.
So gin, all they do is they take vodka, what's going to be vodka, and they infuse it with
Juniper berries and things like that,
and
right,
other
yeah.
stuff like that. And that's all gin really is. So it's vodka with that stuff infused in it. And now you see a lot of infused vodkas. So it'll be like strawberry and watermelon.
So are we saving a toast for the end?
Yeah,
we're
we'll
going to
save
decide
that.
whether we're toasting this book at the end, but for now we could just have a toast to drink.
We could, yeah.
Okay, so,
I don't know.
and I'm going to say na zdоровье.
Na zdоровье.
There you go. That's
is-
to health in Russian.
Oh, okay.
That's what you say when you drink.
This is actually what's interesting is this would be typical of a really good vodka he would have been drinking after he got out of the Gulag.
Yeah, there's actually a story in there about getting vodka in the camps.
Now I didn't get that story because mine was
people-
abridged.
Right. So there's a whole chapter about the camps and the sort of towns that grew up around the camps
Uh-huh.
and sort of serviced the camps.
Uh-huh.
And he's talking about how there were good people in these little towns. And one of the bits is that they snuck vodka by tarring up the top of the vodka bottle and dropping it into a gasoline drum.
Oh, okay.
And then they could pull it out and have their vodka to smuggle it into the camp.
Did they pay for it? Did the prisoners pay for it or something? Or
I got the impression it was like an act of charity for some of the people.
Okay.
It's one of the rare things where he's talking about, yes, everything's bad, but there are still some good people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Which is not a very Russian outlook to think that way.
Right.
They can be pretty dour.
What's funny about Russia and vodka. Okay, so why do we think of Russia when we think of vodka? The first recorded recipe for vodka was written by a Moscow monk named Isidore, Isadore, who penned it in, I think, the 1400s, if I remember correctly.
Okay. It's going pretty far back, like Ivan the Terrible time.
Yeah. However, we know that vodka, or vodka, was also Poland. It was popular in Poland around that time as well. There's books on medicine, actually, from that time. It was originally thought of as a medicinal, which a lot of spirits were. They weren't really drank recreationally.
Again, the scent of doctor's office that you get from...
They weren't really drank recreationally, but it was kind of like, if you think about it, if you got a tummy ache, or you can't sleep, or just any number of problems.
Right.
If you get drunk, you don't have the problem anymore.
Vodka is the cause of and solution to all of our problems.
Okay, Homer. Famously, there's a medicinal text, I think from Poland, and it's dated around the 15th century, and it lists vodka, and the remedies that it says is that it's good for increasing fertility and awakening lust.
Yeah, there's a quote in, I think it's Macbeth, where he says that alcohol provokes the desire but takes away the performance.
But if you've ever been to any drunken frat party with vodka, the awakening lust and the unfortunate increasing fertility, perhaps too, sometimes. But that's the origin of vodka. And what's really funny is the Tsars actually, they kind of claimed the vodka industry. They monopolized it.
Okay.
Prior to the revolution. Then Lenin comes on the scene and bans it outright. Lenin was actually a prohibitionist. So he banned alcohol. Lenin is offed. And then the Russian government, or the communist government, starts up production of vodka again as a monopoly. And so they have sole control over it. Now what the communists did, that I always wondered why more countries don't do this, is when things got bad, they would lower the price of vodka. Makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, it could backfire though, right? People are really, really miserable and drinking a lot. That could be pretty dangerous.
Well, but if you don't care about your people, you want to keep them, drunk and in a stupor,
right.
And keep them from,
I guess that's
being
true.
revolutionaries,
that's true.
And be heroes. Then we can just lower the price of vodka for them. And I guess what did we learn from this?
What did I learn?
Or is there a favorite? Actually, favorite line or passage. Let's do that one.
Some of my favorite parts were all the bits about just like a laundry list of all the crazy things people went to the camps for, which was, we talked about some of the best ones. The guy that couldn't quite speak Russian right, got sent. The guy that choked Stalin's statue, even though he was trying to have a Stalin statue, which I think would be. Then there's just some really good literature bits. There's some great lines. There's a really vivid description. They're standing in the cold and he's reading the orders that have come to the camp, like from far away, and everybody has to stand in like the 20 degree below zero. That was a good bit. I like that. There's some great lines, and this is one I'm going to use all the time, by the way. The grass has grown thick over the grave of my youth.
I like.
I'm going to say that to my kids all the time. Every time they expect me to be able to think quickly or move quickly anymore, I'm going to use that one. There's a really fun bit that I liked early in the book where they give a speech. It's like 1,000 people in a crowded theater, and a guy gives a speech and says something good about Stalin, and everybody starts clapping.
Oh, right.
And no one can stop clapping because nobody wants to be the first one to stop clapping. So the clapping goes on for like an hour and a half, and that was like comedy, like black comedy, like that's perfect. I mean, I was picturing that scene. I was like, that's hilarious. Like, do you have any passages that you really liked? Anything?
You know what? I can't remember all the specific passages, but there was a recurring theme kind of throughout, and it was that once you stop really caring, they can't do anything to you. And this is a theme that started at the beginning. People would come in, they'd be locked up, they'd be taken to prison first or jail first before they'd be sent off to the Gulag. and they'd be put down in front of the interrogators. They would cry and they would plead and all this other stuff, and it's because
And the first thing everyone asks is what for?
Yeah, what
am I being
for? I
arrested
didn't
for?
do it. Whatever.
Nobody knew.
Nobody knew.
Had any idea what they'd been arrested for.
But the moment you realize that you're never going to see your wife again, you don't have any possessions anymore. Like the moment you realize that, they can't do anything to you because they can't take anything away from you because you've already given it up. You're okay with it.
Yeah,
that's fine.
It's one of the things I wrote is Janis Joplin.
Yeah.
Freedom's just another word for nothing left
to lose, right?
Yeah, so.
And that runs all the way to the end. And at the end, he's talking about prisoners who we don't care. What more can you do to us?
Yeah.
And once you come to that point, like, I don't care. You can shoot me.
There's a couple of there's some people that remain communists throughout being in there.
Yeah,
they think they're going to get an amnesty. They think somebody's going to set things straight. One woman was writing letters personally to Stalin. Well into the 1950s.
Well, and they would argue with the rest of them too. They would say, shut your mouth. The party knows what it's doing. That was a really, really powerful part. I mean, that's what it really comes down to.
Yeah.
Because material possessions are meaningless. Right? It's centered in you, I guess.
But he does talk about material possessions quite a bit. There's a lot of stuff about people having their coats taken, their boots taken. They're practical.
But I think that's different than materialism, which is something that they were against, right? The communist regime was against materialism, right?
In the sense of consumerism, like we talk about. There's a whole materialism doctrine.
But I mean, having shoes when it's 20 below and stuff.
It's pretty practical.
Yeah, it's pretty practical. And I think that's different, because they talked about, thieves stealing it from other prisoners and stuff like that.
The thieves are a good bit. That stuck in my head. And they're considered the socially friendly. There's the 58s, the Zeks that are political prisoners. That's just most people. And then there's just the thieves, the people that are in jail for being thieves. He describes them like the way people talk about the Roma. They're just, by character, they're just people that steal and cheat and lie, and you're like,
they get a break from the officials.
They get a break from the officials because they need them. They're sort of like they regulate the prisons to some extent.
And almost like the Rome, like you say, it's just there's no helping them. That's just how they're going to be. Thieves are going to thieve.
Well, I mean, like the attitude towards them, not the reality of what Rome are like. But please send your letters to Clint.
No, well, I didn't mean that. I meant the attitude. I mean, if you're looking at a philosophy that is anti-materialistic anyway.
Right. Or anti-private property, right?
Correct.
The whole divide, and people get this wrong all the time, so hear me out and write this down, everybody out there. The difference between socialism and capitalism is that socialism doesn't believe in private property. Right. Everything's shared, especially owned by the state or by the people, and capitalism is private property, possession of private property. So, they're against private property. So a thief is almost like a necessary middleman to take things away from
it. It liberates the private property for the people who shouldn't have it in the first place.
Yeah. They're bad people, but at least they're not political prisoners.
Right.
So there's a fascination with and a romanticization of thieves in Russian culture. Just like there's everywhere. There's like Robin Hood or the narcos in Mexico or like the mob.
The highwaymen.
The highwaymen in the old literature, And the reality is these are horrible people that kill and steal for nothing, and there is a little bit of romanticism. There's the one guy that escapes and then sends a letter.
I think
there's one thief that gets out by climbing over the wall and then sends a letter, sends postcards back to the Gulag for everywhere he's going. You're kind of rooting for that guy to some extent.
Yeah, I kind of respect him a bit. I'm a bit of a student of history, so I knew a lot of this going into it. The ease with which people were arrested, rounded up. But again, I knew a lot of that anyway. The thing that the author
how
talks about,
extensive it was is something I want to talk about. Because I think he's kind of not correct.
You think he's exaggerating?
I think he's exaggerating the extent of the number of people. He says that there are, at one time, 12 to 20 million people in the Gulag system. That overall, 66 million people were in the Gulags. And yet...
Not at one time, though. Overall.
No, overall, over the course of the whole thing. And I think the numbers are more like a tenth of that in reality. It's a big difference.
Yeah.
When you look at sort of other sources about it. I don't know the evidence for it. I'm just saying other sources are not crediting that. Because my first thought was, I talked to my wife and she said, one guy in our family got sent to the Gulag. And I'm like, one guy? And there were 66 million people in there. I'm like, usually you're getting a sense of anecdotally.
Aren't they Ukrainian?
They're Ukrainian, but that's the Soviet Union. So people were definitely arrested from the Soviet Union. Her grandfather was from Tajikistan, and they lived in Kazakhstan during the war. They escaped Odessa when the Germans and Romanians came.
But there's the whole chapter about countries in exile, where if you're from a certain country, everybody from that country has to go.
Right. You couldn't do that to the Ukraine.
Right.
Too many people. But you could do it to, like I said, like the Chubash people.
Lithuanians.
Lithuanians to some extent, yeah. Jewish people in general were treated very harshly.
Yeah.
Although my wife's take on it was that they weren't treated that badly, that they just kind of were far away from things and didn't get affected terribly badly.
Huh.
Except, of course, by the Nazis invading.
Right.
But it's one of the things that I've noticed about this book is, Howard Zinn, right?
Mm-hmm.
The guy that writes these books. They're almost like an alternative history of the United States of America.
Right.
And it's nothing in it is wrong. It's all factually true, and it is definitely one version of the history of America, but it's only one part of it. It's mostly negative. And the negative stuff is all 100% true. I would imagine one of his big points would be America has always been a racist country. It's true. It's not wrong, but I don't know if it characterizes the whole experience of America. And that's what I'm saying about this. Is it's like
with that, but
there are gulags. It's real. Lots of people died in them, but lots of people from the Soviet Union. This was not their primary experience of living in the Soviet Union.
But he mentions many times that it was that nobody knew.
Right.
That nobody in the Soviet Union even knew about it.
Which is the fundamental
everything
problem.
Covered up.
If there's 20 million people in the camps, how could nobody know? That's like 20% of the people. 10% of the people in Russia in the camps at any one time, and nobody knows about it. I think the numbers are off.
Russia's a pretty big country.
It's a big country, but it's like 200 million, a little bit less than 200 million people at the time we're talking about.
Okay.
Maybe like 150 million people or something.
Easy to lose people.
But 20 million of them. That's a lot.
I think it would be. Actually, I think it would be easy enough to lose that many people. I mean, look, we're talking about a time, there's no social media, no email. We're talking about a country that's barely out of telegrams. Most people, don't have telephones. They have radios.
Did you see the bit where they lost the radio in the camp and he was so happy not to have the radio?
No.
They tried to punish them by taking away their radio, broadcasting the glorious socialist revolution. He was like, "Thank God I don't listen to that radio."
Right, and when they had
nice days in the
they had like a town radio. Like small towns would have a radio.
And some of the places were so remote. Some of the camps were so remote they could get the Western radio.
Right.
Because the jamming wasn't effective outside the big cities.
Right.
So if you were way up in...
So I think it'd be easy to lose 20 million people in a huge country.
It struck me as a contradiction to say that there was this gigantic number and that nobody knew. So that's why I did a little outside research about the numbers. And it's probably not that high, but...
I don't know if it is.
Even the other sources, though. What is the number that I said? So 18 million over the course of the Soviet Union in the camps. That's a gigantic number, and 1.5 million of those died. That's a huge number.
Yes.
So we're not talking. I'm not saying it's not something real.
But it's the conclusion you draw from that.
But it's the conclusion you draw from it, and the weight you give it in terms of this is what the Soviet Union was.
Right.
Right. You have to take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
There's two ways of looking at it.
Right.
And a lot of the people I know from the Soviet Union, this is not their primary experience and historical memory. Another drink?
Yeah, let's get some more.
Once more into the breach, dear friends.
Yes, that's right. And the last one really was about half a shot. So
half a shot? Okay.
But if you want to throw some ice in there, and then we'll do a...
I notice this is no longer half a shot being poured in these glasses.
That's not half a shot, no.
Yeah, this is a little...
Martini originated early 1900s. We're not quite sure where or how.
What's the etymology of martini? Why do they call it a martini?
I think it had to do with the guy's name.
Okay.
I'm stirring these.
Well, we're not going to shake them. I'm not a martini guy. I mean, as evidenced by the fact that I didn't know he drank vodka. I thought he drank
Harry's
gin.
New York bar in New York. It's actually from Paris. You go to New York, make you a good $25 shaken martini. And I mean, there's a layer of ice on the very top. It is so freaking good because it's so damn cold. Having it with ice, people hate that.
Before we drink, na zdrowie.
Na zdrowie. So purists are going to hate that. Well, vermouth is not meant to be
drunk by itself.
No.
What is vermouth? What do we call it? A liqueur? Or
It would be a liqueur. It's not something we really drink.
And there's dry and sweet.
And sweet vermouth, yeah. So,
and this is dry.
1786, Antonio Benedetto Carpano invented the first vermouth for more than 2 years. One of the most demanding professions.
It sounds like Clint's reading from the bottle, but that's actually just how he talks.
I guess you could classify it as an aperitif. It's Italian. Italians dig their aperitifs, sweet or dry.
So you're supposed to drink that before you eat, essentially.
Afterwards. Aperitif.
Oh, I thought digestif was after.
Digestif. Oh, you're right. Aperitif is before a meal to stimulate the appetite. Yeah, aperitifs are usually sweet.
I mean, is it dry vermouth? I mean, they're all liqueurs, right?
Dry vermouth is not. They're usually just spirits with a little bit of aromatics in them. There's another one called Fernet.
One thing I noticed about the book is how influential it was. even though I was only kind of familiar with the title before reading it. And by the way, I never mentioned my biggest surprise is that this was a nonfiction book. I didn't realize that. I read One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which is a narrative dramatization of a guy's day in camp.
Memoir.
Like a memoir. It's fictional, though. It's not a real person, but it's like a memoir of a fictional person in the camps. And I just sort of thought this was an 1,800-page version of that. And it's not. It's a work of nonfiction. It's
Let's circle back to this surprising thing. His writing style was really surprising.
Yeah.
Because it was
good, bad. What's your take on it?
It was interesting. It worked. So what he does, he likes to address the reader a lot throughout.
Do you know what I got tired of? Was the long passages in the second person. You do this, you do that, you do this. I was like, okay, seriously, move on. Like,
but he's writing to fellow country people, countrymen.
Right.
He's not writing to us. I mean, we don't know what the hell he's talking about.
Was he though? Wasn't he writing to the West though? I mean,
there were.
It got to the West. It had its huge impact on the West.
I don't know. The West was an audience because he criticized the West. He kept talking about how the West really didn't care about him. They say they cared about freedom, but yet they left him in this tyrannical situation. So
well, what the hell is the West going to do about that?
Well, they could have. He talks about, like, for example, when there was a Russian prisoner that went AWOL in the Korean War and went to South Korea, and then he got sent back by the Marines because they wanted to be friendly with Russia, So
there were several people in that situation.
Stuff like that. There was a lot of that kind of stuff.
I mean, I think one of the biggest things about this book, I think you could argue that this book, and I'm only realizing it having read it now and thinking about it, is that this book is what formed the perception of the Soviet Union and communism in the West, going from the 70s on, when it became widely read. Before that, communism and Marxism and stuff like that was seen as being like it was a legitimate alternative, like an argument the world was having between these two things. And I think as the 70s and 80s went on, this mentality about what communism was took over, in large part because of this book.
Yeah.
And you see the influence of this book and the descriptions of things. And like I made some some things that I thought of, like, did you ever watch Red Dawn?
Yeah.
So like Red Dawn,
best movie ever made.
Oh, I mean, I loved it.
It won an Academy Award.
I love that movie.
Best movie ever made. Yeah.
Oh yeah, right. Yeah, they give that one. I forgot they started giving that one for best movie ever made.
Yeah, that one.
But there's like the guys in the camps. Just everything about it, you can see it's drawn from this description of what communism is like.
You know what's funny about this? So I am squarely in academia, and I know so many academics. I literally know a guy who has a Marx. You know those little rubber duckies, and they make them in all kinds of different characters. He has a Marx rubber ducky, and he was so proud of having the Marx rubber ducky. And it's always about, well, it's not that communism doesn't work. It was just that they were corrupt in the USSR. Communism works. This one was corrupt. If we tried it again and we made it not corrupt, it would work that time. That's this weird attitude they have that. Well, that's the thing I kept thinking about with the rule of law. I think I was talking about that earlier, where like you just don't have rules. You get picked up and they're just like you're going to jail, and you're like, well, can I appeal it? Do I get a trial? And you're like, no. Basically, there's no lawyers, there's no guarantees of civil rights or anything like that. And I was thinking, is that necessarily part of a communist country? Because it wouldn't. Was that corruption?
You could have rule of law.
Oh, okay.
No, corruption probably would set in. There's too much power. There's too much power in the hands of the people.
Well, you could say China has rule of law.
China does sort of have rule of law, but it implies when I think of China, I think the way China works is for Chinese people, for Han Chinese people, there's rule of law.
Right.
A Han Chinese person cannot just be arrested for nothing.
Right.
If you're a Uyghur, you can be arrested for nothing. You can be forced to go to a camp.
Look, if you fit into this group, no problem. Fit in this group, you're screwed. But
to play devil's advocate, that's what our country was like until the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah. Well, no,
you're
right.
If you were a member of some groups, you didn't count.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. But the law changed, right?
The law changed. That's right.
And
that's the difference.
And the law is now enforced, right?
That's right.
And we are going through more law changes to ensure that there's more equal rights. And
the difference is in our country, when people started talking about that and put that forth and show that was a problem, that adaptations were made and things changed.
Right.
Not perfect. Not saying it's perfect, but
of course not.
Things changed.
Yeah.
Whereas this country just fell apart.
Yeah.
These kinds of things were pointed out. The corruption and the rot in the system was pointed out, and the country just fell apart.
The reason that the rottenness was there and that it was sustained was to sustain the leadership. It became because like the people in power don't want to give up the power. Because if you're not in power, you're just like all the other common folk, right?
Well,
you don't have crap. Nobody in Russia had anything unless you're one of the top dogs. And then you get double pay, and they make all these excuses to give you bonuses and blah, blah, blah. You have big houses and stuff and big cars.
Right. Well, there were a lot of people in America that didn't want to give power up. Didn't want to live in a system that wasn't white supremacist.
The laws did change, though.
Laws changed, that's right.
In a place like the USSR, they would change the laws to make sure they stay in power and keep it corrupt. And I think...
This may sound self-serving, but I think a big part of it is that we have lawyers. We do. Lawyers come in, and if somebody's, having their rights challenged, there's a lawyer that comes in to support them and a lawyer that's against them, and we have an adversarial system of law like that, so no one side ever wins.
But you have to be able, you have to have a system that actually listens to the lawyer.
That's right. That's right. And there's a part in the beginning here where he reports, I think, like the transcript of one of the last trials where they actually allowed lawyers to show up, and it was just a farce.
Yeah.
The so-called, I guess this would be the defense attorney, essentially, was just didn't want to come across as arguing with the prosecutor too much and was pointing out things for the prosecutor to help him get the guy to jail. And it was a joke because the adversarial system broke down.
Right.
That guy was not really fighting for his client.
Right.
He was just a tool of the state.
Well, the conclusion was already drawn before the trial began. Like, this is what's going to happen. Look, all governments are made by people, and people are imperfect. No matter what we do, they're always going to be imperfect. There's nothing we can do about that. But
do people in schools today still read the great works of, like, anti-communist literature? Such as, like, Orwell, especially. Like, we read those. I read those when I was a kid, and it's like, to some extent, you'll always be skeptical of this kind of thinking once you've read Animal Farm. And that impacted me as a child. I was probably 10 or 11 years old.
I don't know.
I never read the Gulag Archipelago. It's too long. You can't assign this book until anything in college. But we read 1984.
So I don't teach at that level. And I don't teach literature.
But I mean, like, high school kids, are they still reading these things? Or are we just... I guess it's not as important today. We're not locked in a life and death struggle with communism.
That's true.
To dominate the planet.
That's really true.
So it's not...
Yeah, there seems to be a shift in priorities. And actually, that's kind of a good segue into something that I wanted to ask about. Can you equate this story to anything today?
Well, I talked about what's going on in Xinjiang in China, where Uyghurs, they're in these camps. They're not death camps. They're not killing people. But
that we know of.
There are widespread stories of, like I said, like women there being raped to get them to do what's...
sterilized.
They take people and they force them to memorize entire speeches and writings of Xi Jinping in Mandarin to force them to learn Mandarin and the ideology of the state.
Right.
These things fit very well into the Soviet Union. It's limited, it's a racial minority, it's not happening to everybody in China, but it's pretty dark.
There are also work camps.
There are work camps, exactly. Yeah. Well, re-education camps.
There's stuff they are doing that is coming to the Western... This is kind of the analogy that I drew. Cancel culture.
Yeah, well, I was thinking about... I haven't really weighed in on this with friends. I cannot stand talking about politics with people on the internet in the written form. I like talking to people face-to-face about politics, as long as I think they're being...
Why not? You can get so much done.
Oh, you get
especially
so much
on
done.
Facebook.
On Facebook, where everybody can see what's being written. Everyone's got their back up and they're angry.
Yeah.
That's a terrible format.
Everybody's an expert.
Discussion. But I was just reading through a discussion about, like, what happened to Gina Carano, which... I don't really know what my take on that whole situation. But anyway, I saw somebody actually say she was given multiple chances to re-educate herself. And I'm like, oh yeah, we should get some kind of a place where we could put all the people that need to be re-educated and just, like, concentrate them in that place.
Yeah,
concentrate all of them in one place to be re-educated. And I'm like, do you not hear?
For their own good, they can work. For their to liberate themselves, they can work.
Right. And it's about the question of the rule of law, because this is not state action. The state's not canceling these people.
Right.
So to some extent, it's like, okay, Disney can do whatever the hell they want. They're a company. They can fire somebody that doesn't put their brand forward.
Right.
I guess I'm okay with that. But at the same time, generally speaking, I like people to say whatever the hell they want. Right. To go into line. Not that I agree with, I think, almost anything she said. A lot of what she said was not stuff I'm particularly impressed with.
Sure.
But it's a free country. Private action sometimes rises to the level of almost being like public action. If it's so powerful. Like taking away people's jobs because of their free speech at some point. Well, I mean, like, for instance, when African Americans were banned from going to diners in the South, or, all kinds of other businesses and things like that, it was private action. These are private diners saying you can't come to the diner.
Right.
So on one hand, you think to yourself, okay, they just don't ever go to that diner. Everybody boycott that jerk who runs the diner. But when it's systemic so across the board, every business is doing it. It might as well be government action.
Right.
These people
Absolutely.
are being denied
Yeah.
their basic rights. If you deny people's right to speak, and it's all private action, taking away their right to speak, at some point we've got the same kind of problem. Not to draw an equivalency between those two things. Although I don't know, free speech is pretty important.
When you take away anybody's platform for speech, you're isolating them.
You're probably radicalizing them.
Exiling them.
Exiling
at the
them,
very
yeah.
least. And so what they're going to do is, radicalizing, that's a good way to put it, because what they're going to do is gather around with other exiles.
Get on the internet in some kind of weird forum and
Right,
start saying even
right.
crazier things than they were saying before.
Right.
I think we should talk to people that say things that we don't approve of. I think we should talk to them, try to at least push back and let them know what we think of what they think.
I think we should just not be scared of it, man.
Exactly.
I mean,
Exactly.
if your ideas are so fragile that somebody saying something against them could turn people away from your ideas, well, you need to maybe rethink your positions a little bit, don't you?
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Or come up with reasons why those people are wrong.
A lot of the people I talk to who talk in this line and think in this line, and I hope I'm expressing myself right, they
Talk in
think
which
that
line?
some
Think
of
which line?
that some forms of speech should be shut down. In other words, I think they think in the lines of some things are so dangerous that they can't be tolerated. But the problem is, who makes that determination?
Right.
What if we said you say you're a Marxist? Let's say that's too dangerous to be tolerated, and now
Right.
you lose your job, and
Yeah.
I wouldn't support that. I would fight for your right to be a Marxist.
Right.
As long as you're not taking actions to overthrow the government or setting off bombs or things like that, things that actually, the people in Charlottesville, for instance, did physical things that were crimes.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
that's not free speech.
Right. Yeah.
Murder or whatever
Yeah.
it was.
A pipe bomb is not free speech.
No, a pipe
Okay.
bomb is not
Right.
free speech. And also some forms of speech, like Oliver Wendell Holmes said, you can't yell fire in a crowded theater because your speech is directly harmful. People hear that and they fall over each other and kill each other. So there's a line, but it needs to be defended. That line of free speech. And I've always been a big advocate of free speech. So, in terms of just words. When the Muhammad drawings were done in, I think it was Denmark originally?
Yeah.
Charlie Hebdo.
Charlie Hebdo, thank you. Yeah,
France. So, a lot of Muslims that I know, they said, well, you know what? You can't say that there was no Holocaust. So why can't we make a law that you can't draw Muhammad? And I said, what are you talking about? You can say there was no Holocaust.
Right.
You cannot say that in Europe. You can go to jail for saying the Holocaust didn't happen.
Now,
Just for saying that.
Yeah.
Which clearly is an abominable and worthless position to state. But I would defend your right to say that dumb thing.
France is like that too.
Yeah, I think so. I think it varies from country to country. Germany clearly is more firm about these things.
Yeah.
One of my friends ran a store, like doing consignment for people's antiques and things like that, and he just said there's a rule: you can't sell anything Nazi related. You can't sell an Iron Cross or anything online and stuff like that. Okay, whatever.
That's
Granted, most of the people that would want to buy it would be creepy people,
right?
Who should be on somebody's watch list somewhere. Right. But it's just a thing, It's just a symbol. God,
it's such a complicated thing, and it's so much more complicated than a newscast or anything like that could make it out to be. For me, Gulag.
It's a joke in Russian,
What's that?
Gulag Archipelago. They have the same sound, and the sound is preserved in English.
Makes sense.
A little bit,
yeah.
But you don't hear it right away the way you do in Russian.
To me, it really was the more I read it, the more I thought it was a metaphor for our culture. Like a prisoner of the Gulag was sent away. He's never heard from again. His life is over. What he used to do, he could have been a professor, he could have been an engineer, or he could have been a farmer, whatever. That's all gone. He can't do that anymore. Once he's done, then he's exiled for life. So even after he's served his time, he's exiled. Even after he says, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. If he confesses, okay, even after you confess, they still send you to the Gulag. How many stars have we seen that said, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that, 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Right.
When I was a kid, I shouldn't have done that. Great, thanks for the apology. So you're still fired, and you're never going to work again, ever. You know,
there's some pretty extreme examples. I guess we're getting kind of off the topic.
Not really.
It's
not really.
Related,
I think
right?
To me, it's a huge metaphor for what's happening today.
I mean, it's the differences. These people were dying. You know, I mean, there's a question of scale. I mean, this is a much.
That's obvious. Well, that's why it's a metaphor.
Too far. You could read a lot of political literature, and you can get lost in it and overdraw the analogy to your own situation. You know,
right.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you're wrong.
No,
I thought about these issues too.
Sure.
There was a guy I read about the other day who was at a conference, and a young lady said something about the use of the N-word, like in something. And he said, well, you shouldn't say the N-word, except he didn't say the N-word.
Oh, that was the New York Times.
He said the actual
that was the New
word,
York Times
which
reporter,
is a questionable choice. I wouldn't do that. I'm talking about it here, and because I don't want that word to come out of my mouth.
Sure.
So I don't know why he did that. But this is a guy who's been working for the New York Times for like 40 years, and his job was just over. And I'm like, in that context, it doesn't really make sense. You reprimand somebody.
It was a little bit nuanced in that. It was
maybe I didn't read the story in great detail.
He was on a peer,
some sort of mentorship program, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Took these high school kids to Peru, and there was a girl she's a high school girl. Within the last year, really had gotten accepted to these, very private, very affluent colleges. I don't know about private, very good, like Ivy League colleges. After she got accepted, some kid released a video of her saying that she got her driver's license in words.
I heard about that.
So this is like a 16-year-old girl who says this. This asshole, and that's what he is an asshole, waits 2 years.
Oh, I heard this.
Until she gets accepted, and then sends a clip to who she decides to go to college to, and says, "Is this the kind of person you want in your school?" Yeah. And of course they drop her. The person in the New York Times thing, the person was asking about that and said that word, and so the New York Times, the reporter, the journalist says, "Okay, did she say N-word?
Was she rapping or was she?
Or was she rapping and she said N-word or whatever?" And he said N-word in asking that question.
Yeah.
Oh my God, this person said that word. Some asshole comes back and says, "You should do something about this reporter." And so the New York Times publisher says, we looked into it. It's fine. We talked to him. And then all of these precious snowflake wussies that work for the New York Times, cause a big uproar. And then the quote that comes back is saying, "We won't tolerate racist language. Context doesn't matter." Here's a news flash.
Which is ridiculous.
Here's a news flash.
Because the context
language is freaking context.
Yeah.
Okay, language without context is meaningless.
Yeah,
There's
it's a bit
meaning.
like sending somebody to prison for 10 years for carrying Stalin's statue the wrong way.
Right, exactly.
The guy's trying
to
honor Stalin and have his bust in his office, and the way he carried it home got him sent.
You can't have language without context.
This is a guy
you can't have meaning without context.
The guy's sitting in a conversation. He's having a conversation about, obviously everyone agrees that this word is terrible and can't be used, and they're talking about that.
Right.
And he goes to jail.
Right.
Or not goes to jail. That's the difference. Right?
That's the
state
thing.
Doesn't step in and send him to jail. The difference is he's
been put in jail. His whole reputation is metaphorical. No, I mean his whole reputation is screwed. That's not metaphorically he's in jail, right?
Yeah.
But who knows? They might go back and scrub, anything he's ever done. They might take. Who knows? Because they're doing stupid stuff like that nowadays.
Yep.
And the whole thing. I work with language. I mean that's what we do. With what you do, you work with language, and you know that context is everything. A single word means nothing.
This is what happens when people are ideological. They have a tendency to cling to these absolute bright line rules about everything. Zero tolerance for using that word, even if it's like a law that says don't say that word.
Right.
You go to jail for having written that law, kind of thing. It's zero tolerance. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
And this is what happens with ideology, because ideology, any ideology, anything that you're clinging to and is always your ideology and is the answer to every single problem is always flawed.
Right.
Because that's not real life. Real life does not lend itself to those kinds of...
So let me ask you a question then. Okay, going back to the book, who are the ideologues in this book? The ideologues weren't the interrogators. The ideologues weren't the bosses at the camp or the guards at the camp.
Yeah, they're sort of behind the scenes.
Yeah, the ideologues are the party bosses. He says time and time again, he didn't necessarily know if people really believed the crap that they were saying.
Yeah.
But they were saying it. Because they had to say it.
Right.
Because if you didn't say it, you're screwed.
I always wonder that.
Just like the first
I wonder that when I hear people...
The first person that stops clapping, that's the guy that goes to jail. And by the way, That's the guy that went to jail. Is the first person that stopped clapping after an hour and a half. Is that what we're looking at today? Are these really ideologues, or are these people just...
Does the 10th guy standing around the spit that you're roasting a witch on, does he really believe in witches, or just going along with... Who knows? The effect is everybody's burning a witch, right?
Right.
So it doesn't really matter. But you wonder, and you're right to point it out, because where does it come from in this context? Who are the people setting the rules in this? It's almost as if it was just this beast coming from nowhere.
It just kind of like kept going. You know, they had no control over it after it was let out of the bottle, right?
It's like the way that ancient people looked at war or something like that, or famine. It's just like this gigantic embodiment of evil, like rushing forward with nobody able to stop it. Hopefully, that's not what's going on in America today. I don't think so, but I think we're in a little bit of a spasm of not thinking terribly clearly, and it's on both sides. There's on both sides of the political spectrum.
And I think it'll change. I'm confident that it'll change. I'm not worried about that. But I mean,
we went through this in the '60s, for instance. I think actually Solzhenitsyn makes this point, and he makes it in the opposite way that I'm about to make it. He says that a nation, and I don't have the page number or the exact quote, but he talks about the benefits of losing a war. Like the Russians lost World War I, and the trauma it had on their society was like beneficial in some way, which I don't know how he could say that, having it turned into the Soviet Union. But we lost Vietnam, or failed in Vietnam. We didn't really. It's not like Washington was in flames from the Vietnamese army marching in. But anyway, the war was a failure, and the society had to come to grips with that. And so you have this like chaos. And we've just had these two wars. Same thing.
Yeah.
Clearly, we defeated the Iraqi army when we invaded Iraq, but the policy is a failure.
Right.
You know, the country hasn't turned into anything good. Neither is Afghanistan. Yeah. And the country has to come to grips with that because it makes people question leadership. Makes people question authority of any kind. You know, you see this throughout history whenever there's revolutionary epics, including the American Revolution. There's a lot of like questioning of authority and like changes and things that don't seem to have anything to do with politics, like the way people get married and stuff like that, all shift after a revolution. I think that's what we're doing now. We're going through a bad period. A period where everybody's questioning everything and there's a lot of radicalism, and I think it'll probably drift away. I imagine once we get out of COVID, the 20s are going to be awesome. Everybody's going to be making money,
roaring 20s,
partying, the roaring 20s all over again. I think by 2029, most of this will be forgotten.
2029, just 9 short years. Well, 8 short years.
8 short years. It's not that far off, right?
Yeah.
What do you think? Did you like the book? Are you toasting this classic?
Am I toasting this classic? We got one more to do, actually.
Finish your drink. Okay.
Yeah, finish. You got a lot of drink to drink.
Not anymore. I don't.
Because I got a story to tell about this one. Okay. So. You've had a Moscow Mule, right?
I have had Moscow Mules. Yes, I like those. That's a good drink.
So we're gonna make one now.
So that is, I know ginger beer. Do you have, what is it, like mint or?
I don't have any mint.
Okay, so we're just doing just ginger beer and vodka. Okay, and I respect the choice of diet ginger beer. I'm also an old guy that needs to not have any more calories than I need to have.
Yeah,
that is a lot of vodka, my friend.
That is a lot of vodka.
We're gonna get a lot funnier here on the podcast pretty soon.
So,
anyways,
this is not just ginger beer. This is Cock and Bull ginger beer.
Didn't we just talk about language, Clint? Aren't we not going to use that kind of language on this?
You did.
How is it?
Oof, it's too strong.
Too strong with vodka. Yes, I saw that. It's like 2/3 vodka. It's a small glass, but still.
Can you hold your nose and take a big drink?
It's very vodkesque.
Yes.
Very vodkesque. But it's not, it's not impotable, if that's a word.
So the Moscow Mule.
First one I ever had was in Vail, Colorado.
When?
Very memorable. About 10 years ago. We were driving through.
10 years ago?
Something like that.
But you're like... Wait until you're 30 to have a Moscow Mule.
I'd never heard of a Moscow Mule.
Really?
First time I ever heard. I think it's a Western drink, or it used to be.
Western drink.
I don't know. I'd never heard of one before.
Okay, the story of the Moscow Mule, it was created in, I'm going to say in the 1950s, and I think it was like 1954, 1955. And it was the distributor of Smirnoff for the U.S., the owner of this company, the Cock and Bull Ginger Beer. The owner of this Cock and Bull Ginger Beer company met with the distributor of Smirnoff because Smirnoff they were first starting to import into the U.S.
Okay. And
they wanted to figure out, okay, what can we do to make Smirnoff huge? And he said, well, let's come up with a drink.
Okay. Ah.
My ginger beer, your vodka, mix it with some mint, and they made it up. It was like in Connecticut.
When did copper mugs come into the story? Because those are required now. We are not.
I know. I don't think I was part of the original story. I think they just came up with a stupid drink and as a way to do it. And you can look back at like Smirnoff ads from like the 50s and 60s, and like all these stars of the age, like Woody Allen
Wait a minute. Na zdrowie.
Oh yeah, very much so.
We forgot. We're getting sloppy
Yes.
here on
Yeah, I know.
toasting the classics.
The reason I want to do a Moscow Mule
Okay.
is we're talking about a Russian book plus this drink. Okay, the way it came into America was they just
Very
said-
capitalist, it sounds like.
Yeah, as if
Yeah.
you were the distributor of Smirnoff, and I owned this ginger beer company, and you were asking me how can we make Smirnoff like popular in America, and I said let's do this drink, and there you go. That
And
was- that's
you
the-
create something to try to fulfill a consumer need, and if it
Yes.
fails, it dies.
Well-
Whereas in a command economy, you decide you're digging this damn canal, and you're digging the canal even if nobody needs it.
no matter what.
And you would never create something like that because nobody could see that was going to be successful
You know what?
before it was made.
Vodka is the perfect drink for that. For
To draw that distinction between the two things?
for the USSR. Think about it. Vodka is a perfect drink for communism because there's no taste. Just
Quality of vodka is
blackout
usually just
drunk.
how sick does it make you, right?
Right, pretty
about
much.
it,
Yeah, I mean, you can have like lousy tasting vodka and it still does the job. Quality isn't a thing. In the U.S., by comparison, we had rye whiskey, we had bourbon whiskey, we had all kinds of stuff that would get you lit.
But we just have unsophisticated palates. We can't tell the difference between good kinds of vodka, or is it true?
I think we can.
Your palate's
No,
obviously
I think we can.
much more
Yeah.
sophisticated than mine. But like
I think we can.
when I drink a bourbon, I like it or not. I like the
Right.
taste of that particular bourbon.
Yeah.
Vodka is just how much do I feel like I'm in the doctor's office? Like I
Yeah,
said,
but how often do you-
ill
how-
do I
how
feel?
often do you drink straight
I don't.
vodka?
I don't. This is the
Right.
first time I've had straight vodka in years.
Yeah.
Had a bad experience with it. So
Really?
oh yeah.
You're gonna fall down.
No, not that bad.
You'll be okay. Any last words?
No,
For-
the question that I put out there before we had to pour our last drink: are you toasting this classic?
I am. It opened my eyes. He's right. So he was writing in 1960, like 1 or 2.
Yeah, I think it was a process of
When he-
writing that
when
went
he
on
wrote
for a
this
really long
book, yeah.
time. Yeah.
It's like 10 years they wrote
Yeah.
this book. So he was writing in the 60s, and one of his main, not complaints, but one of the things that he mentioned quite a bit was that people just don't know. And whether it was 60 million, and I gotta say, like, if it was 6 million, that's still a lot of people to
That's
kill.
right. That's right. That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
If you're going to kill a lot of people, 6 million, 60 million, that's a high mark. But to say I killed 6 million people, that's a lot of people.
There's no question. That's what I was saying. The 1.8 million dead that Wikipedia
Yeah,
quotes.
whatever,
That's enough for me
Right,
to
right.
think that this was a bad system.
Right.
Maybe we should.
Okay, 1.8 million
adopt it.
people. 1.8 million of your own people.
Of your own people.
You
Right,
killed.
Right.
And I can see where you say, well, maybe he exaggerated because he's pissed off.
Right.
He's been in there and he hates the system.
There's a participatory bias also.
And he
You
was
were in-
he was
you were in
very
the
happy
Gulag, so-
that Stalin died. So I mean he did not like the guy. It's understandable that he would exaggerate a bit. All that being said, he's right. People don't freaking know.
I think a lot of Americans, especially, maybe just people in general, don't, because everybody knows what happened in Nazi Germany.
Right.
Right. I don't think people understand that our ally, the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
and Stalin, these are our allies. These are people that were on our side in the war, that we probably couldn't have won the war without them. By the way, I don't think there was any chance we were going to defeat Germany without the Soviet Union's contribution. That they were at least almost as bad.
Yeah.
It's not genocide. It's not really. There is an element of small-scale genocide in the Soviet Union. There are
Yeah.
these minority
Perhaps,
groups who are being treated
yeah.
badly. But the main point is killing millions of your own people. I mean, what happened with the Holocaust is just like a nightmare. Just when little children being hauled off to gas. I mean, it is worse in a way. In that way,
Yeah.
It's just creepy and industrial and like something straight out of hell. But the numbers of dead. There's not a big difference. We're not even talking about the number of people that starved to death because of the collectivization of farms and things like just the Gulag system.
Yeah.
That's a third of the people that died in the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I don't think a lot of Americans are aware of that.
No.
In terms of not being aware of things, I don't think they're aware that our ally was really not much better. And there's a big reason why we ended up at loggerheads with the Russians after the war, because they were bad guys.
Yeah.
They really were. They were trying to expand and take over everything. And
There's this whole conspiracy theory about Patton, that he was killed because what he wanted to do was going to Russia. And just
well, nobody was doing that. That wasn't happening. But
Just-
that was like MacArthur, same thing. General MacArthur in Korea,
MacArthur,
same thing.
same thing.
We weren't doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, Truman was right. We're not dropping the bomb on the Chinese. We're
I
not
know.
doing that. That's insane.
I know.
So, I mean, this is not a country that would support a war like that, like preemptively.
No, of course
the
not.
massive millions,
But I think that's the one thing that this, not the one thing. There's a lot of things this multi-books that you read.
Multi-volume series.
But the one book that I read,
once more.
the one thing that it really does is it kind of opens your eyes to, they don't teach this stuff anywhere. They don't talk about this stuff anywhere. And like you said, whether it was
when we talk about the Holocaust, one of the reasons we talk about it so much is so that such a thing could never happen again.
Right.
You know, I mentioned we don't read Animal Farm, 1984, Gulag Archipelago, Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. We don't read these things anymore because, you know, to some level, this is not a clear and present danger anymore. We're not facing the Soviet Union. We're not pointing nuclear weapons at each other and could die any day because of it.
Right.
But we probably should stay on top of not letting this happen again.
Yeah.
Right? This kind of thing. I mean, it's going on in Venezuela right now. Over the last 10 years, 10, 15 years.
You know, that's always the interesting part. Like I said earlier, you know, I've heard from so many people I know that are pro-communism. So the problem with something like USSR is they were just corrupt. If we could just end that corruption, it would have been fine. But it didn't work there. It didn't work in Cuba. It didn't work in Cambodia. It didn't work in Maoist China.
Well, one of the differences we talked about earlier about how the United States adapted in the face of its contradictions, China did that. The reason why China succeeds today is because they adapted in the face of Maoist failure.
Well,
They adopted Western practices and
but it's kind
of the economy.
But for them, it's kind of hard to do an about face from the however many millions Mao killed.
But they did it. They just said everybody can have a business now.
They did. They did. But the rest of the world is like, oh, fantastic, Amazon, wonderful. Thank you for making all this crap that we can buy for really cheap.
They adapted their system. They realized it wasn't working, and they went with some of the strengths that we have. Myself, I would toast this classic. I like the book. I think it's and like I said, I was surprised to find it was a work of nonfiction, but it's a powerful work of nonfiction. Yeah. It's like one of these great works that just the writing changes the world, you know?
Yeah.
You talked about how it took him 10 years to write it. The book I kept thinking about is The Origin of Species. And I kept thinking how Darwin went on the voyage of the Beagle and didn't publish the book for 20 years. Worked on it constantly. Yeah. And you read the book and it's like this. It's 1,200 pages long and it's just evidence, proof, you know? And you read it and it's compelling because of it. It's not like Thomas Paine or something like that, which is it's just so eloquent and it's rhetorical, beautiful work that inspires people, or Harriet Beecher Stowe that pulls at your emotions and changed everybody's way of thinking about slavery. It's just a wealth of evidence, and I think it changed the global perception of communism in the critical years when communism started to fall apart. Yeah. And I think it's a big part of it. I think that's why he won a Nobel Prize. Was it for It's for literature, right? It's not a Peace Prize because he's not the right kind of person for that.
It was, and it was for I think it was for literature, but it was for the contribution to freedom, basically to fight for freedom.
Right.
And I have to say this one last thing about that. Have you heard what Amazon in the last couple of weeks has done with controversial or conservative leading books? So
no. Oh, really? With books? Huh?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So Amazon is it's the biggest bookseller in the entire world.
I finally found this one, by the way, at Barnes & Noble. Couldn't find this on Amazon.
Really?
Not really.
I did. I found it about a week ago. Decided that, and they quietly created a new rule in their guidelines that they will not stock.
But who decides? I mean, in principle, yeah, sure. I don't want to see that. I don't want to see things like that coming up on the list. But.
So what they dropped, there's a book that was recently written about transgender. It was about transgender people. It was written by, I can't remember her name. My apologies. She wrote the book as a journalist, and she didn't wage war on transgender ideology or anything like that. What she pointed out was that transgenderism has risen in the hundredfolds over the past couple of years as popular talk is. And she talks about a lot of the psychological and medical problems that come along with it.
But this is. Yeah, I mean, I think where you're going is exactly what I'm saying. Who makes the distinction, right?
Right.
Because clearly this is probably something that would annoy a lot of people, and maybe it's not even true. Maybe it's just BS.
Who knows,
what she's
right?
saying? But it doesn't sound like hate speech to me.
Okay.
But then I'm not deeply committed to this cause, and wearing my heart on my sleeve. And,
well, they dropped that book. So Amazon said, we're not going to carry that book anymore. Mein Kampf is still, you can buy that anytime you want. You can go buy Hitler's manifesto.
When I graduated high school, I got a letter from I couldn't get my diploma because I had not paid library fines. What book is that?
I love that.
It was Mein Kampf. I was like, I checked out Mein Kampf. When
Did you really?
I never actually read it. It must have been like everybody in Nazi Germany. It was like there in my house for 4 years.
Holy crap!
I don't know. Yeah.
So you can't read a book about transgenderism.
Right.
That's what that book is. That's dangerous.
Right.
Oh, Mein Kampf.
In my own case, you don't read Mein Kampf because you think that there's cool things being said in Mein Kampf. You want to know, what's the story? What did Hitler say before he came to power? But it's a historical document, in other words. When someone says things as they're trying to get office, we have a tendency to say, they're not really going to do those things when they're in office. Right?
Yeah.
They're not really going to make Mexico pay for a wall. That's just something they say.
Right.
The lesson we learned by reading Mein Kampf is sometimes these people tell us exactly what they're planning to do when they come to power.
Okay.
And so these are the lessons of Hitler. You want to read these things about Hitler so that we're like, okay, keep your eyes open. This could happen someday.
Okay.
They could do something. Somebody could do something similar.
All right.
It's a historical document. How did Hitler come to power? What did Hitler say? How can we avoid Hitler? I mean, honestly, the thing you're talking about, this transgender thing, sounds to me like it doesn't sound like hate speech to me. I don't know. I didn't read it. Maybe half of the book is taken up with a screed about I can't stand guys wearing dresses, but I don't know. So.
Well, and to be fair, I haven't read it either. One last thing on our book. He couldn't publish his book.
No, I think it was published in the West. Eventually.
It was published in the West.
Really got out there. It was being passed around by
he did not publish this book in the USSR. By small presses, people handed it over. At the very beginning,
it was viral.
It was viral at the time, which is like you take literally the paper file and you hand it to somebody else,
like
right?
Thomas Paine, like Common Sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Common Sense just flew.
And at the very beginning, you learned that people had 48 hours. That was it.
Yeah, no, not happening. Not 48 hours.
So
no way.
My book was 468 pages. But the real book...
Maybe if I was in a gulag and I had nothing to do,
right?
I could read this in 40
So the real book was 20-something hundred pages, right? Because that's 1,100? No.
I think the total was about 1,800.
Yeah,
the third volume is shorter than the other
right.
three.
So the entire thing is 1,800 pages.
Give or take, yeah.
So imagine having 48 hours. After this, you got to give it to this other guy. That's how this book is distributed. This is like 1966 or 7 or something like that. Okay?
You could read it in 48 hours, couldn't you? I'm trying to do the math in my head.
I don't know how, man. Because I read
I've got kids.
But that was the point. It's like next time.
In principle, we said this before. It's a private company. They can do whatever the hell they want.
Yeah, no. Well, public company.
Well, I don't mean public in the sense
right.
of. I mean a private company, as in not the government.
Sure.
Public-private in that sense. Publicly traded stocks. But once you get to a certain scale and you're denying free speech, that you could almost be considered to be a governmental entity. Not a governmental entity, but to have that level of effect. If Facebook is, regulating our freedom of speech, then we almost have no freedom of speech, which is not true. I think we give too much power to these people. We spend too much time on there. But Amazon's different because you're talking about the number one bookseller. Yeah. Does anybody read books anymore? I know I do, but I don't know how many people are still reading books.
I think so.
I hope so.
I hope so too.
I hope so because, for instance, this kind of a book is exactly why a book is better than just getting a couple of articles on the internet. Because the wealth of proof and the wealth of evidence and the extensive, going into it for 1,800 pages is a much stronger argument than what somebody can put together in 1,000 words on a website in an article.
Right.
And this is how most people are consuming political evidence these days. It's in short
absolutely.
blurbs. But this is better in a lot of ways. This is a much more powerful argument for what he's saying than a little article would be.
Right.
There's a place for it. We both said we're toasting.
We are toasting.
So one last time, na zdrowie.
Na zdrowie.
And we are toasting this classic, the Gulag Archipelago, The Joy of Zex.
Yes. All right. So before we move on, this is our first episode. We've got a movie next. Is that right?
That's the plan.
Okay.
You're not going to try to come up with it right now and just choose the movie off the fly. Don't pick that 70-hour-long Russian science fiction movie. Just pick a movie that I can watch. Just be done with it and have it watched.
I didn't say I was going to do it.
Oh, that's you. You're next.
No.
You're next.
Okay.
No, okay.
So you can't see what's going on, dear listeners. We are doing this.
Oh, we're going to Rochambeau for it?
Yeah, we're
All right,
gonna.
so are we 1, 2, 3 shoot or 1, 2 shoot?
1, 2, 3 shoot.
Okay, so-
ready? 1, 2, 3 shoot. Oh, okay.
So the movie falls
All
to
right.
me.
So I was scissors. He was rock.
I like this system.
All right. So
theoretically, we could end up with me picking everything for like a month.
well, this is the only time we're doing it.
Oh no! I think we should always Rochambeau for it live.
No.
I think we should Rochambeau live every time. No, okay.
So we're doing a film next, right?
Correct.
Okay.
It has to be a classic. It has to be somebody has to say it. It's not Grandma's Boy. We're not doing that. So, although I've considered doing 1 week, which is definitely not a classic.
That would be fun.
And that would be Grandma's Boy would fall into that. So it's in case everybody
right.
is really looking forward to it.
So we will we'll come back with our just for the next one, right?
The next one, the next film.
Yeah.
Next time you hear from us, we've decided to toast this classic.
All
See you
right.
next time on Toasting the Classics.
How do you say it in Russian, though?
Мы будем видеть тебя на Toasting the Classics.
Good enough. Bye, everyone.
That's it for our special edition of the Gulag Archipelago. For those playing along at home, get some gin, soda, and lime juice and make yourself a Gin Ricky for next show when we discuss F. Scott Fitzgerald's timeless send-up of the American Dream, The Great Gatsby. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know if you're toasting our first classic episode. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @reactivenuisance. I know it should be called X, but I'm not doing that. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.